Hi everyone, welcome and thanks for joining. I think a few people are having some issues with the registration link, so we may get a few people joining in later. But what I wanted to start with tonight is just a quick welcome. What we are going to learn tonight is all about how to train with your cycle, but following on from the previous presentation that I have done, this one's going to be more focused on training to your cycle length, knowing that each of us are unique and we all have different cycle lengths, which require a little bit of adjustment from the 4-week training module. So my aim is that by the end of this session, you will have some idea of how to adapt your training to the various phases and the length of your cycle. So a little bit about me for those who don't know me. My name is Sierra. I am Sparkle Fitness. Sparksman is my maiden name and hence the name of the business. So I used to be a lawyer, and then after the birth of my daughter and after the pandemic, I had a little bit of rethinking and wanted to do something that was more attuned with my love of sport and running and triathlon. So I retrained and got my personal training qualification, and over the last 3 years I have been a personal trainer, a running and triathlon coach, and I've been gaining further qualifications as a mum safe certified trainer, safe return to exercise, and various other qualifications on women specific training concepts such as pregnancy, postpartum, and the pelvic floor. So what I am doing now is trying to encourage mums in particular to get back into exercise in a safe and effective way. So that's a little bit about me. What my journey has brought me to for this topic is to try and get a greater awareness of my own cycle, because I was training quite competitively for triathlons, and I started to notice that my cycle would change. I'd get some lighter flows, which initially I wasn't really concerned about, thought that that was a good thing really, because I thought it was a little bit of a hassle having my period and having flows and all of that sort of stuff interfere with training. But then what was happening was sometimes I'd skip a period, and it wasn't until I started investigating further why that was happening that I started to appreciate that the concepts of overtraining are not necessarily immediate, that it can take some time, a couple of months even, to really filter through, because the event that I was training for actually did really well, but it was the aftermath when I was resting and recovering and wasn't doing any training at all, that some of these negative effects started happening to me. So moving on. The first thing that we're going to talk about then is why you should track, and that's going to form the basis of the whole presentation really, because if you don't track your cycle, then you don't know what you don't know basically. So I'd be interested if anyone who is watching this does track their own cycle currently, and if you do track, so you can comment that in the chat box, or if you're watching this on a replay later on, you can put that in the comments if you're comfortable with that. Are you just tracking when your period occurs, or are you tracking other parts of the cycle, like any bloating, gas, soreness, injuries, and illnesses? Because those things can all start to form a bit of a picture. And the thing is, I mean, I don't know about you, but I can't really remember what I had for lunch on Monday. If you can, you have a fantastic memory, but I'm not really sure if you can remember what you had a month ago. Um, and this goes with some of the feelings and changes that we have hormonally and how they manifest themselves physically or mentally within our period and our cycles, is that we might know that something is happening and be aware of it, but if we don't write it down, then next month we've forgotten about it, even if the same thing happens again, unless of course the symptoms are really severe or significant. So that is why we want to track for two reasons: for your health and for your training. In order to know what our normal is, we need to find out what our regular and normal cycle length is. And that's going to be different for different people. But once you know what your normal is, then you're going to know if there are deviations from that normal. For example, stress and illness, they will change your cycle length. And at certain times in your cycle, you may crave more food or certain types of food. You also might have a habit of getting ill before your period starts. All these things start to form a bit of a picture as you track them and start to understand if they are happening at the same point in your cycle, no matter what that cycle length is. Now, then this feeds into your training because it will help you to identify when you can train harder and when you need more rest, because there are certain points in your cycle when you can train harder and your body is primed to, and other times when you need more rest. And that we'll talk about those phases next. So then, monitoring and noting this down, you'll be able to keep track of stress and your recovery and when you need more of it. You'll also start to know if you need to combat any PMS symptoms, and such as when you're feeling like you just can't be bothered training, and other times when you feel super motivated. And that way you know that it's more of a consequence of the stage in your cycle rather than because there is anything wrong. And then for you, that will just be completely normal. As I mentioned in my introduction, tracking the cycles will then also lead to earlier identification of overreaching and overtraining. So when my periods were changing and my cycle length was changing, that was the precursor to me skipping my periods altogether, which is not a good thing. So that was the, I guess, early warning sign that I just wasn't aware that I needed to be aware of. So one of the ways to track is obviously with a good old pen and paper. And I'll also just pop in the chat box for you the link to an app that you can use, or the web page rather, for the app. And this provides a very simple way. This one's Wild AI. There are other ones out there. This one uses artificial intelligence to start to predict things about your cycle and your period and symptoms. And it uses artificial intelligence to do that. So the more you put in, the better it understands you. It also will give you ideas for types of training to do depending on what stage of cycle you're in, as well as educational pieces about recovery, nutritional information, and that sort of thing. So a really handy resource, and it only takes about a minute every morning just to fill in your sleep, all that sort of thing, how you're feeling. Now, let's go to the actual cycles themselves. So if you were here in my previous seminar that I did for the club, we talked about this. So I'll just go over it at a high level, but just a good refresher, because this is what's going to lead into our cycle lengths and how they differ. So we have our full cycle here. Quite often it's talked about in 28 days, being a month, being convenient. We often hear about it's that time of the month. It's spoken about using that terminology. But the 28 days is a convenience. It might be an average, but it's not necessarily what most women experience. In fact, most women will have a period that differs from 28 days. So then what we have is a follicular phase and a luteal phase. So the two main halves there. Obviously, in a 28-day one, they're represented by being completely even. Now, we've got our menstruation, and then we move into the pre-ovulation phase. This is our low hormone phase. So day one is day one of your bleed. You move through that low hormone phase. Your estrogen starts to build up, may peak your energy levels and your sexual interest through to ovulation. This phase here is normally when some women can feel like superwoman, feeling really great, really sexy, really confident. And that's obviously because the body's signaling that it's time to make a baby, so to speak. And then you move into the luteal phase and into the pre-menstruation phase. And this is where progesterone becomes the dominant hormone. You'll still have higher levels of estrogen, but the progesterone hormone is quite a lot higher. And this later luteal phase is where you may start to notice PMS symptoms. Now, did you know that there are actually 140 PMS symptoms? It sort of blew my mind when I heard that, because I could probably only name probably less than 10, your usual bloating or cravings, maybe a bit of mood swings or feeling a bit flat, cramping, that sort of thing. So there's a whole lot more. So again, it's about what is identifying your normal, and you may have things that happen to you that don't necessarily happen to your friends, but that doesn't mean that they're wrong. Now, once we've gone obviously all through that, it starts again. This one, in case I didn't say, this is the high hormone phase. So this is the phase where we can experience a lot more stress, higher cortisol as well. So that's the one that we want to be aware of, really. This is also the one that stays relatively constant, about 12, 14 days. It's this follicular phase here that is the one that will change to either shorten or lengthen your period. So that's the one we want to see if we can figure out how long that is. So moving on, we'll just look at a different graphic to explain this, and hopefully you can see the graph there with the body temperature and also the hormonal levels, and it has a few other bits and pieces down there that we're not going to be so concerned with today. But what we are looking at here are the changes that we go through our cycle, and it's obviously set to a convenient, I'll just delete that timer, 28-day model. But as I said, this follicular phase here will change, and the luteal phase will stay relatively constant. But what we want to talk about are the basal body temperature and the hormonal changes. Now, if you've had kids, you might know all about the basal body temperature. You might have even taken the readings every morning, basically to come along and see where you have the little dip in body temperature before it spikes back up again as your core temperature is raised. So that's a perfectly acceptable way of continuing to do that, to find out where your follicular phase ends and where the luteal phase starts, and where you go through ovulation. The other way is then roughly estimating, once you know your normal length of cycle, then you could just take away 14 days, and you'd have a rough guide of your follicular versus your luteal phase. So the second thing that I want to talk about are these hormonal levels here. So we have estrogen and our progesterone. I'll just see if I can delete that chat, minimize that chat box. Cool. So progesterone is never zero, like this graph might be indicating, but it's low in this phase. And as you can see, all the other hormones are quite low as well. Estrogen is this gray line that then comes up, spikes along with the other hormones that are responsible for basically sending the egg out and triggering that ovulation. Then it takes a little bit of a dive and is a bit more variable over the luteal phase. But as you can see, this progesterone comes up quite a lot higher than everything else before dropping down as you head back to your menstruation. Now, we've been given a lot of social cues and I guess maybe a little bit of brainwashing, for lack of a better word, that we have mood swings and that it's our hormones and our periods that cause this. So while it's true that estrogen and progesterone do regulate our mood, and changes in hormones can affect our mood, our energy, appetite, and how we deal with fuel and what we eat, they're not the reason why someone is a bitch, or calling someone a bitch, or having a massive mood swing at a certain time of the month. It's the hormones might play a part in it, but if you're having such massive mood swings or other really significant PMS or period symptoms, then that's a sign that something isn't quite right with your hormonal balance, and that would be something that would need further investigation. The hormones themselves are not causing you to be really teary or really upset, but at that luteal phase, as I said, it is a higher stress phase, so things may affect you more than in the follicular phase. But estrogen is a good thing. We want to have our periods. We want to have these hormonal fluctuations, because when they all work in sync with each other, this helps to control our mood swings, our body composition, our energy levels, and is good for cardio, which is obviously good because we want to run, right? So we want everything in balance, and we want these hormones to do what they are designed to do. But as I alluded to, they can affect how things happen at different times and different stages of our cycle. And one of those things is our appetite. So another thing that our hormones have been blamed on is, or blamed for, is weight gain. And it's true, when you move into that luteal phase, the progesterone triggers an increase in our appetite, because our body is trying to start to store fat in preparation for a pending pregnancy. Also, the things that it does at this stage, like building the endometrial lining, does cause an increase in energy demand, but it is only a small increase, maybe like 100 calories or so. So this is something like a bit of an extra snack would be able to deal with that increase in energy demand. Again, if you're having really massive sort of binges or triggers or massive shifts in weight, then that would be something to question why that's happening, and perhaps it might be tied in with something a little bit more psychological, or the hormones might be wreaking havoc for some reason. So that would be something that would be worth investigating more. But it's also an interesting point, because at this follicular phase, our body wants to use the fuel. In the luteal phase, our body wants to hold on and store it for that pending pregnancy. So to combat that sort of thing, it's a great time for things like dark chocolate, to give you that little bit of kill that craving, so to speak, and also why it's recommended to increase protein around this time to help with that feeling of being full and satiety and all of that sort of stuff. So that's the way that you can help deal with those cravings and those triggers that are caused by the hormonal fluctuations without blaming the hormones. But as I said, with it being a high stress time, this is a bad time to start a new eating regime. For people who have been on and off diets, it's not good to try and start new things at that time or make big life decisions. Much better when you're going into your follicular phase for those changes in behavior and routine. A lot easier for the body and the brain to deal with it. So let's talk a little bit now about our training adaptations that go along with those phases. So again, I went over this in the first seminar. So just to recap, we've got our low hormone phase, a great time to hit those higher intensity interval sessions. Like I've alluded to, this is where we're sort of faster, stronger, we feel better, we recover a little bit quicker, but it's not meaning that you back up every day with a hard session. You still need to progress your training in a sensible way, especially if starting out. The 10% rule for running, and if you don't know what that is, let me know. And also generally women don't respond well to backing up hard days one after the other, although at this stage you will be able to maybe back up a couple. But we still need our rest and recovery, because that is when our gains are made, when we recover. When we do the exercise, our muscles get tiny tears in them, and then the idea is they rebuild stronger. But they're only going to get stronger if you allow them time to rest and heal and rebuild. Now, like I mentioned, this is the time when your body wants to use the fuel. So give it the fuel to use. Use carbohydrates. The body is going to be more likely to use them rather than to store them. That's what it wants to do. Okay, so the next phase, obviously our high hormone phase, that luteal phase, and remember this is the phase that's going to stay relatively constant in terms of length, but we're going to have higher levels of our hormones, our progesterone like I talked about, and also things like stress. So your body is going to be under more stress, and it may be more affected by other stresses in your life, hence the PMS symptoms may be more easily to anger or get upset like we talked about before. Also, with that basal body temperature and your core temperature rising, the body's going to feel hotter, so you may sweat more. So especially in the summer, really need to pay attention to hydration. May need a little bit of additional something in the drink, like electrolytes, to start to replace that, especially on hard, long sessions. And also, fueling does still become really important here. Progesterone's main job is to shuttle glucose and amino acids away from the liver, the skeletal muscle, to build that lush endometrial lining, right? So in the luteal phase, you're in a catabolic state, and you may have heard that term because it basically means, or people say it's talking about the body eating itself. So at the early luteal phase, what the body is doing is breaking down the fuel that you put in, your macronutrients, your lean mass, to increase the amount of circulating amino acids to build that tissue. So if you don't give your body the fuel that it needs, then it is going to source it from elsewhere, i.e. breaking down existing muscle to get the amino acids that it wants. And this is what we don't want, because then we're going to lose the gains that we're making in training. So we need to feed our body. So it's important not to go into sessions in a fasted state, because your body wants the fuel for what you're going to ask it to do. And if it doesn't find it, it's going to get it from elsewhere. And also the stage of the cycle that you're in, it's going to then take it from the muscle instead of your food. As I said, this also increases your energy demands slightly, so don't be surprised if you feel a little bit hungry, and that's why the protein becomes even more important here, and especially making sure you get that protein in shortly after finishing your exercise. Women have a lot smaller window to get that protein and carbohydrates in for recovery for that very reason, because the body is trying to source the amino acids for the building of the lining, and then also it goes into a catabolic state to break down the lining once there is no pregnancy. Okay. Now let's talk on to the general 4-week training adaptation that we're probably all quite used to. We've all probably had at some point training programs in this 4-week block where we have 3 weeks of build and then a week of recovery. And please interrupt and ask any questions as we go through these next few slides in particular, especially as we're adjusting and talking about the different cycle lengths. So what we have here, we have the 3 phases. The alarm phase, or when we have the stressor, the training stress, or this can be applied to any other life stress. So our body has a little bit of a, what's going on? And then it starts to adapt. And then our resistance to stress improves as we go into that adaptation phase. And then at some point, we get overloaded with the stressor that we're applying, and we become more fatigued and more overwhelmed. So that's going into phase 3, that recovery phase, or that exhaustion phase, where we need more recovery, we're in a catabolic state, and the body's more inflammatory. But hopefully, as you have started to see with talking about the phases of our cycles, and how in particular that follicular phase can be different for different women, that this 4-week or 28-day model isn't going to work for you if you don't have a period or a cycle that is 28 days. So you'll end up pushing hard when maybe you need to be resting, and vice versa. So let's look at that a little bit more now. If you have a short cycle, so maybe something around the 21 days mark, how are you going to go about adapting your training load to work with the cycle, especially given what we've seen before? So remember, day 1 of your bleed is day 1 of your cycle, and that's when you're in the follicular phase. Now, if you have a short cycle, that phase is going to be shorter before you hit your ovulation and move into the luteal phase. So you're going to, whether we've got the green, this is where we're going to do our HIIT style workouts, short fast intervals, our VO2 max, sprint intervals, heavy weights, low weights. Basically it's high intensity. Your body's primed to respond well to that, of course with rest, as I said. And then as you're moving into ovulation, into the luteal phase, you'll move into tempo work. You'll start to bring that intensity down, steady weight, plyometric, descending weight sets, depending on the goals and your training. And then as you're going into your late luteal phase, so around 3.5 weeks here, just before your period, this is when you're going to be then focusing on recovery and skill and technique. This is where you need to have the rest and start to recover from the build of the stress that you've been applying to your body, your training stress. And then week 4, for you guys who are on a short cycle, when you're meant to be resting before, under the general 4-week training model, you're actually starting your period again, so you're back into the high intensity stuff. So that's where the 28-day training model is going to let you down a bit, because you'll be building in weeks, 2 and 3, when you're meant to be easing off and recovering. And when you're recovering, you're actually meant to be working harder. So I hope that made sense. And that's, again, a rough idea of how you will adapt a short cycle. So now when we're talking about long cycles, we're talking about those ones that are basically 35 days plus. And as you can see, again, it is this follicular phase that has lengthened out and has gone to almost about 3 weeks in the case here before you're going to come to ovulation and then move into the luteal phase. So with this long cycle, you'll have a longer period in terms of days in a row where you'll be able to hit those high intensities. And then again, you're going to move into your tempo, bring the intensity down, steady state work before going into your recovery mode before your period. Now, I want to emphasize here that even though you have more weeks or more days in which you can hit those harder intensities, you don't have to do it every day. In fact, that's not advised at all. But don't take this to mean that a long cycle is better than a short cycle. Short cycles have more cycles, so they'll still get more opportunities for those hard sessions. But what this is all about is identifying your body and your cycle so you can work with it rather than against it, but also so that you're not comparing yourself to someone else or working to their cycle or training program. So for example, group runs and group workouts and interval sessions are, really popular and really great because they're a great way to run with other people and stay motivated and all those good things. But some weeks you might feel that you're on it and you can hit the paces and you're faster than your friend, and then the next week everything's different. She's faster than you and you're feeling flat, and it's probably for reasons like this. Just those changes in hormonal levels will affect how you feel about your training sessions. So finally, what I want to talk about is the oral pill. Up until now, all the hormonal changes that I've been describing and the menstrual cycle and tracking is all really for people who are not on a hormonal contraceptive pill or some other form of hormonal contraceptive. And that is because the hormonal pill, especially the combination hormonal pill that I'll talk about here, deregulates your natural hormones. So your hormonal response is going to be then dictated by the pill rather than by your body. So, for example, the combination oral contraceptive pill, it prevents ovulation and thickens the cervical mucus, basically by putting you in a high hormonal state. So your body never really thinks that it's pregnant anymore. Now, when you take this pill, what happens is your estrogen and your progesterone spike a little bit, or actually spike a lot, progesterone more so. And this may make you want to consider when you do your training and when you take your pill, because obviously you're going to go into a higher hormonal state, a higher level of stress. And then if you do a highly stressful activity such as interval sessions, then you're putting more stress on your body. So you might want to consider things like taking the pill in the morning, training in the evening, or training early morning and then taking the pill. But of course, that's all going to depend on when is the right time for you to take your pill, because they do need to be taken at approximately the same time every day. But when it comes to programming and your training program, you can see that you can fit within that 28-day cycle a little bit better, but there still does need to be some adjustment. Now, because when you go into your period at the start of your sugar week pill, that's not necessarily saying that you're ready for the high intensity stuff on day one like you are in your natural hormonal responses. You have to wait a few days for the effects of the pill to start to wear off and the hormonal levels to drop. Then you're ready for your high intensity stuff. And again, when you come back into your active pill week, the first few days, you'll still be able to do those higher intensity stuff because the hormones will be building back up again. That progesterone will be building back up again. And then as it does, you'll start to move into your threshold work, your tempo work, steady state, and then into your recovery skill and technique. So that's why I've sort of shunted the wording along a little bit, because it doesn't quite fit into those distinct weekly boxes like it might otherwise do if for the normal 4-week training model. Now, just another note there about the fast and explosive point that I've put down there for some training techniques and training types. That applies to older generation pills as they have different progestins in them, and that's why it's really important to know what generation pill you are on, because it can impact on how you train. So hopefully that all makes sense. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the comments and I'll come back and answer them. Finally, what I want to emphasize is training versus performance. You can perform at every stage of your cycle. Periods aren't bad. There's no bad stage of your cycle. They all have a distinct purpose. Performance is really a mental thing. So you will overcome a lot of obstacles or times when you feel flat for that one event where you lay it all on the line. What the training, trying to tailor your training to your cycle is meant to be for is to make the most of your cycle and make the most of the different stages, rather than feeling like you're pushing uphill when you're feeling flat and not really knowing why. But always listen to your body and remember that no two women are the same. Okay, finally, I will just leave you with my contact details. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the comments, or feel free to contact me on any of these aspects here, and we can talk further about anything. Or if I said something that didn't quite make sense, please feel free to get some clarification from me. I'll also just take this time to say that I am starting a Strong Mums running strength class on the 11th of May. Now that's up here in Korori, and it's at 7 p.m. on Thursdays. And what it is designed for is for mums who run, no matter what your speed, no matter what your ability. But what I want to do is design a strength program for mums and women that actually works for them and are different body shapes to men, are different physiological differences, so that we can actually help to minimize some of those injury risks that we are more prone to, and such as knees and hips, and work on those. So I hope you will join me. I've got some trial spots left, and they are $10 for the class on the 11th of May. So please get in contact as soon as possible if you want to grab one of those last remaining spots. Lastly, here are a few references in case you want to read anything more about them. And thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it, and thank you to WAC again for hosting me and allowing me to speak to you. So happy running, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evening, and thank you for watching this on the replay as well. Ka kite.